everybody is not going to want to birth at home, but many people do not want to birth in the hospital. And my catchphrase is that the same way there's a liquor store on every other corner in the hood, that's how we should have access to birth centers and, clinics and, quality care.
Hola, hello, bienvenido, and welcome to the Clearbirth Podcast. For those of you returning listeners, thanks for being here. And for my new listeners, I'm your host, Annette Perel. Today we are speaking with Nubia Martin. Nubia Earth Martin is a community birth worker and founder president of Birth from the Earth, Inc., a nonprofit organization steeped in education and empowerment, providing a variety of health and wellness services. Nubia holds a master's degree in midwifery and a bachelor's degree in sociology. She is a childbirth educator, birth and postpartum doula, and lactation consultant. The legacy and lineage of the grand midwives runs deep throughout Nubia Martin. She sees midwifery not as a profession, but as a way of life and a rite of passage. Welcome, Nubia. How are you?
Greetings. Welcome. So happy to be here. Thank you.
How have you been holding up with COVID?
Well, I'm a mother of 5, so it's always nonstop. It's just been a little bit more nonstop, but holding up pretty well. Yeah.
Okay. And that's good. That's good. I'm so glad to have you here. And as a point of clarity, you are my first guest who I don't know personally and have not met before. So thank you.
Well, I feel like I know you from our phone conversation,
exactly.
Like kindred spirits for
yes,
sure. So
definitely.
Thank you for having me.
No, it's my pleasure, my honor. I'm really excited for people to hear all about you. And I'll just start and jump into the show. And I start with a few questions at first, and then we just take it from there. So,
okay.
What career did you want to do when you were in grade school, high school, and college?
Okay. So when I was in grade school, I think I always thought about being an actress. That was always my thing, full of drama as a child. And when I got into, I'd say high school, that's when I became more interested in birth work, actually. But looking back, I was fascinated by my mother's copy of Ina May Gaskin's Spiritual Midwifery.
Oh.
She had that book on her shelf, and as a child, I remember being fascinated by the birth stories, and I would actually sneak and hide and look at the different, pictures and all that because, they were giving birth. So I thought it was probably taboo, but I was fascinated by it. And likewise in high school, there was a parenting class that was supposed to be for expectant teen moms. I was not an expectant teen mom, but I wanted to take this class because I was just intrigued about wanting to know how to care for my future children. So I think it's always been birth work on some level.
Oh, that's really interesting. Similarly, I had an interaction with a book. My sister had Our Bodies, Ourselves when I was 10. Mm-hmm. And I started reading that book and asking my mother questions, and she was not having it. She told me to put the book down. She told me to stop worrying about it. I walked around with this book the entire time, for days, just reading everything. And my mother's Panamanian. And I'm the youngest of 3 girls, so you already know that there was no conversation of anything I like to say from below the neck. So that wasn't happening. So when you were in high school and you were fascinated by it and you took that course, that was really interesting. So what did the course cover?
So I remember the instructor asking me, are you pregnant? And I said, no. And he said, well, why would you want to take this class? And I said, well, I hope to be a mother someday, so I'd want to know the skills of caring for a baby. So it was pretty much the typical, you get a baby that you're supposed to care for a couple of weeks. We weren't as fancy as the ones that automatically cry that they have nowadays, so we had to kind of stimulate all of that. But it was really just about caring for the basic needs and preparing for parenthood, which I thought was amazing. And it was an elective class that not many people took, but I thought it should have been a mandatory class that everybody takes to prepare yourself for, the rite of passage of being a parent.
So you had to have a baby with you the entire time or just for the class? The entire time?
The entire time. So the same way, you wouldn't be able to just put the baby, in a locker and go on everywhere. You had to get a carrier. I remember I was going to Humanities, which is all the way on 18th Street in Manhattan, so taking the train to school, and the looks I would get because the baby is, strapped to you.
Yes.
And it was really bad. People would look at you like with that look of shame, and you almost want to tell them, this is just a baby for a class, but then putting yourself in the mind frame of, well, this is some people's reality that they have to deal with. So that was interesting to sit with that and see how society, perceives teen, parenthood.
Yeah.
Interestingly enough, when I first started teaching childbirth classes, I taught free classes to teen expectant moms at Planned Parenthood because I felt like this is still somebody who's about to become a parent. This is still somebody who needs to be nurtured regardless of their age. So that was really important to me. And I think that experience in that class is what led me to wanting to do that for teen expectant mothers and teen expectant people.
Yeah. I think you're so right in that being a teen mom back then was just perceived as this awful thing that, happened to you. I had a guest on my previous show, the last one, Shala Konomi, and she spoke about her mother gave birth to her when she was 13.
Wow.
And how her mother told her when she went into labor, her mother just told her to go to the bathroom and tell her when her water broke. So her mother labored for hours on her own and then going to the hospital and was shamed even further by people in the hospital. So it definitely, it awoke in something inside of you, realizing, carrying this baby around, that this is how they're perceived. And it's great that you kind of taught them. And how did you get into teaching childbirth education and then thinking to getting with Planned Parenthood in that regard?
Yes, so it was definitely the birth journeys of my first two children. So like I said, I have 5. And with my first 2, I didn't really know what to expect. I just knew that I wanted to have a natural birth. I didn't really know much about home birth at that time. So I had my first 2 in the hospital. Had natural births, but the experience was definitely lacking the level of care and spirituality that I would have wanted to bring to that. So after having my second hospital experience, that's what led me to looking into becoming a childbirth educator, because I started doing extensive research because I said to my husband, I definitely want more children, but I don't want to do it like that. I want to do it differently. So the resources that I started coming across, I said to myself, wow, if I didn't know these things existed, there are probably many families that don't know. So that's what led me to wanting to just teach childbirth classes. And when I started out, I just went to the local clinics out here in Yonkers and asked them if they had any classes in place. They said all of the classes that were being taught were at the local hospital. And I had taken that childbirth class, and it really didn't prepare me for birth. It prepared me to be a good patient in their hospital.
Definitely.
And I was So when I got to Planned Parenthood of Yonkers and asked them, they didn't have any classes in place. And I said, well, can I just leave my cards? I'll teaching classes for free. And it was all expectant teen mothers actually who reached out to me. So we did a nice group class. And they were amazing. They were so, inquisitive. They really wanted to, know, well, how painful is it going to be? What's going to happen? They were really, really, attentive. And it was nice to see them kind of bouncing ideas off of each other. And then, unfortunately, even giving them all that information, a lot of them still had horrible experiences at this local hospital. Yeah. And that's what led me to becoming a birth doula, because I realized it's not enough to just arm somebody with that information. You sometimes have to be there to advocate for them, to provide comfort measures. So that was how the natural progression went from childbirth educator into birth doula.
So where did you take your birth doula training, and how was that for you?
Yeah, so I did my childbirth educator, birth and postpartum doula training through the Aviva Institute, which is no longer in existence, but they were amazing. It was online, but then you had some in-person things that you had to do in your community. You had to attend a certain amount of births to make sure this is really the field that you wanted to get into. And it was nice because even though it was online, which again, I reminded you, it's not my thing, I was able to, there was still a sense of community, and there were people from all over. So it wasn't like it was just New York. So kind of learning about what the challenges were in different people's communities, how they were overcoming those challenges was interesting. And it really made me start to look at what was lacking in my immediate area. So looking at the high C-section rate at our local hospital. In Yonkers, we only have one hospital where you can give birth. So that was an issue because all of the clinics are set up to usher you into delivering there. And that was one of the things that I wanted people to understand, that you always have a choice of where you'd like to go to give birth, regardless of where you receive your prenatal care. So that was a big eye-opener to me, because I probably would not have chose that hospital for my first two births had I known that myself.
Yeah, I find that that's the biggest barrier for a lot of people, is that knowing that they have choice. I remember when I first started as a doula, a lot of people would say, I'm going to my local, the hospital is just 2 blocks from me. Like that was the best thing.
Closer is not always so better. Close. Right.
Exactly. And they discovered that the hard way, unfortunately.
Yes.
But, so you had already had 2 children by the time you became a doula. So how was it to support someone through that process? The first time you supported your birth?
The first time was rough. We were at Sound Shore Hospital in New Rochelle. And I remember this was a friend of mine, and she was progressing really quickly, which I thought was amazing. And then at one point she was like, oh my gosh, this feels different. This feels really, really painful. I don't know what's going on. And I said, okay, maybe you're transitioning, and, trying to use all the language that I just learned and, comfort her. And she said, no, this is my 3rd child. Like, I know what this does not feel right. And then her doctor came in and said to the nurse, how come you haven't turned the Pitocin up again? And she said, wait, what? You gave me Pitocin? She didn't even know. They hadn't even told her.
Wow.
And that was what changed, everything for her. So I remember her saying, how can you just give me something and you didn't even tell me? And at that time, I really didn't know enough about Pitocin. I knew the medical lingo behind it, but I didn't know how it reacts in a woman's body.
Yes.
So witnessing that was hard. And then because things went from just the natural progression of her having a pretty precipitous labor on her own to now Pitocin being thrown in, the next thing you know, they were saying, you have to push, you're fully dilated, the baby's right there. And her mind had just not caught up to where her body was. So she was refusing to push. And I remember the nurse got up on the bed and pushed on her belly. And I was just like, oh my God, So it was very traumatic. And I was not expecting that. I had to do a lot of, postpartum work with her to kind of process what happened, and explain to her that it wasn't right, what happened. Yes. And it made me kind of feel helpless because I didn't have the language at that time to know, to say to the nurse, what are you doing? That's not even something that we do,
Exactly.
How do you give somebody something without their consent? All of those things. So that was an eye opener.
Yes.
Right. So that was an eye opener for me. Yeah. Made me realize that it's not just about, rubbing somebody's back. Like, depending on where you are, there's a lot that goes into that. And you have to build up resiliency for yourself, if you're going to be going into some of these settings, because it can be traumatic for sure.
Yeah. I know that I'm the 3rd child, and my mother, when I had asked her about her birth with me, the only thing that she remembered was that they cut her. And that's all she said. And she was like, they cut me. And when I would ask her why, she had no idea why. You know, and then after I became a doula, I realized, because they were practicing episiotomies back then.
Right.
So of course,
and practicing how to suture.
How to suture. And on a 3rd-time mom to give an episiotomy I was no bigger than my middle sister. So it was just unnecessary. And she had no idea. So growing up, that's all I knew about my birth was that they cut her. And not understanding why. But I remember
when I was in midwifery school and we had to do our clinical training, and I was at Jacobi Medical Center, and the 24 babies that I caught while I was there, I was very proud that all of the moms were intact. because I wasn't, I'm a hands poised midwife. I was not, all up in there. And I remember when we were doing our evaluations that was one of their critiques. Oh, you haven't had enough experience in suturing. I said, well, what would you have me do? Cause a tear for somebody just to practice suturing? I said, I thought the goal is to make sure that, they're intact and we don't have to do that. If somebody obviously has a tear that needs to be repaired, I would do it. But I couldn't understand why that would even be a thing. We practice on modules and all that, but I'm not going to inflict something on somebody just to get, experience. So I remember that was also kind of shocking to me that was one of the critiques. Oh, you haven't had enough tears. I'm like, isn't that the goal?
That's not the goal. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
So I
jumped way ahead. I know.
No, you did it. No, it's perfect. It's a perfect segue because you talked about childbirth education leading to doula work, and then doula work leading to postpartum work, and now into midwifery. So how long after you were a doula did you go into midwifery?
Right. So I started doing doula work in 2008, and then I realized after serving as a birth doula, a postpartum doula, lactation consultant, that, okay, you want to be a midwife. This is what, you've wanted since you fell in love with that book years ago. Yeah. Go for it. So I'm in New York, so I had to look into, did I want to do the CNM track or the CM track? So for those who aren't aware, sure. Right. CNM is a certified nurse midwife. So that means you have a background in nursing before you go into midwifery school. CM is a certified midwife. So that means you have a background in a different area as an undergrad degree. And then you go on to a graduate degree in midwifery. So the midwifery education is the same. It just depends on what your background was before going to midwifery school. So if somebody is going for a CNM, that means they have an undergrad degree in nursing. I have an undergrad degree in sociology. So I applied to SUNY Downstate Medical Center in Brooklyn. Got accepted the first time that I applied, which I hear is not common for some, sometimes you apply and apply. So I took that as a sign that, okay, I guess I'm supposed to go. I started in the fall of 2014. And I'll say what I wish I had known prior to starting midwifery school was that just like every other system in this country, there's a certain level of biases and systemic racism that comes along with that. I naively thought, well, this is midwifery. This is caring for women and families. This is not going to happen here. I went in very rose glasses for sure. And then was rudely, oh no, we're still in America. Okay, this is still, and it was hard. And I realized that many of the students of color who started with me did not continue. They felt that it was too traumatic for them. Some left to other programs. Some took different career paths. I was like, I'm sticking it out because this is what I want to do. And for me, this is not a profession. This is my ancestry. This is my lineage. This is my birthright. Yeah. And I was going to do whatever I needed to do to complete and be able to serve my community. So, long story short, I finished in May of 2018. And, what I've come to understand is that there is an intentional suppression of Black midwives, which is reflective in the fact that the profession is 95% white right now, which is also reflective or correlates to the fact that we have a high maternal mortality and morbidity rate for Black women. The lack of providers that look like you, that know what it is like to live day in, day out as a Black woman in America, who would then not inflict those same biases on somebody else because they know what that feels like. That is sorely lacking. So yeah, that was a big eye opener, but it was a motivator for me. And I really try to encourage anybody, especially those who maybe been doing doula work for a while and feel they want to go deeper. I'm like, yes, do it. Because while we definitely need, birth workers of color in all facets, I feel that we definitely need more midwives of color. So I always encourage anybody who feels like they want to go a little bit further with it to pursue it. And to that end, I created a support system called Kidada. Kidada is the Swahili word for little sister. So for anybody who's looking to get into midwifery, I'm like, you definitely need somebody to be like, okay, look out for this. And when this happened, because if I had that, I feel like I wouldn't have been as traumatized as I was going through the program. Yes. And what I got from a lot of people when I was going through it, older midwives, Black midwives who had gone through the same program before was, oh yeah, that's just what you have to go through. I went through that 30 years ago too. Yep, you just have to tough it out. And I was like,
that's not okay.
Really? Yeah, that's not okay. And I vowed that, I would not let that happen to somebody else. It's like not on my watch. If I can help it, I'm not only going to support somebody through the process, but call it out when it's wrong and hold people accountable.
Yeah. So let's go back a little bit so we can, there aren't that many midwives of color.
Right.
Currently. But I think I saw somewhere online that nationwide there's only like 10% of all of the midwives are midwives of color. But prior to births going into hospitals, let's talk about the history. Prior to that, it was 100% in our community, women of color who were supporting other women of color through this process. And they learned, it was from granny midwives. They learned from their midwife in their town or their grandmother or their aunt. But it was a lineage of work that they had done throughout this in order to do this work, because it was brought over from the slave ships, right? Because they'd have us believe that we were just slaves, but they didn't take just slaves. They took doctors. They took educators.
Took skills. That's right.
So the midwives then came over here and became the midwives for the slave owners to deliver all of the slave babies. So
and
what
to
they
deliver the slave masters' babies too.
Exactly. It was for everyone.
And to nurse their babies too.
And to, be nurses to them as well. Yes. And so then when doctors decided that this was a profession that they wanted to get into, that's when they turned around and said, we're going to start pushing the granny midwives out. And they systemically did that.
That's right. And the term granny was used to kind of, diminish their skill set. So we now exalt them to grand midwives. That's what we use that term, to give them, just their proper honor and due respect. But for sure, I would say that it was intentional. So, the same way that the maternal mortality and morbidity rate disparities, I also feel are intentional. It goes back to our history here. Yes. So during our enslavement, during our bondage, Black women were a commodity because there was a law that if I was purchased and I then bore children, all of my children were now property. So if I could be purchased for, $300, right? But now I give birth to 10 children, that's 11 for the price of one for that slave master. So they wanted us to procreate in rapid succession. They wanted to prove that we could have babies back to back and still be out in the fields or still be in their homes cooking for them and caring for them. They wanted to prove that we could bear certain amounts of pain to justify inflicting this type of breeding on us. So that is where people like J. Marion Sims, came in with, I can do a surgery on a Black woman and she can survive it without anesthesia. So of course, she can, have children back to back and still go out and work for you. So that type of, mentality has always been put on us. And then once slavery was quote unquote abolished, now we're no longer a commodity. So now it's how do we prevent you from procreating, right? Yeah. And not only how do we prevent you from procreating, but how do we slander the hands and the heart and the skills of the women who have been protecting these pregnancies? Because no, it is not healthy to have children back to back like that and to be worked to the bone. But you had these grand midwives who knew healing herbs, who knew the laying on of hands, who knew the strength of spirit, who also knew how to use herbs to prevent pregnancy sometimes when they knew that, okay, no, if this woman has another baby right now back to back, this will be the death of her. So it was protective work. It was passed on work. It was, like you said, our lineage. And this was something that they did not understand, but that also they feared because they saw it as power. So when the whole slander happened and, they're, these granny midwives are dirty and they're unskilled and they're uneducated, right? That was the key thing. They're uneducated. You need to go to, a nursing school. You need to go to one of our schools and learn our ways. But when birth moved to hospitals, there was a lot of pushback because they didn't even know the skills of hand washing, which I think everybody knows now, right?
Now, yes, everyone is very aware.
Now everybody knows.
For 20 seconds.
Right. So we've been doing these things. We knew that you don't go from caring for somebody who's sick to catching a baby without cleansing, and not just cleansing your hands, cleansing your aura, cleansing your spirit, being ready to receive a life, it's a very spiritual thing. And that was taken away. And, it made it very difficult for people who didn't have money, who didn't have means, to be able to attend these schools. And that is what's still continuing to happen today. So that is why the profession, not only in America, is majority white, but across, internationally, this is an issue. So there's an intentional suppression of Black midwives across the world.
It's like, no, it's okay if they talk. We've had children on the show and we've heard them before and introduced them.
That's
so.
my daughter.
Hi.
This is Persephone, and she's the little midwife. So
that's so great.
4.
You're starting
She'll
her
be 5
early.
in November, but
Blessings.
Well, she's starting early. She's been saying she's a midwife for about a year now, so I'm not going to tell her she's not. And,
exactly. That's definitely true. She's learning.
Yeah, what I was saying was it's not just here in America, it's internationally, and there is a direct connection to seeing how these numbers are continuing to rise from maternal deaths for Black women and the lack of Black midwives across the globe. So until we recognize that as an issue and, topple these systems that are intentionally suppressing, Black midwifery, Black birth workers, we're going to continue to have this problem, which, means that we have to take this into our own hands. It's an SOS situation for sure.
Yeah. That is definitely one of the things that has been drawing me more and more to midwifery, and finally this year making the leap of going back to school and finishing. But what I thought that is also interesting, I just started reading, I forget which one because there are a bunch of them. One of the books on reproductive justice, and like you mentioned that there was this push, this suppression of making sure that women now of color do not have children. But then even before that, the exact quote escapes me, but it was something to the effect of like, before your children bore your father's name, right? The father's name. And were considered of the father. But once they realized that for slavery, they did not want they did not want them to inherit anything. So then they turned around and changed it and made it so that you were of your mother.
Exactly. Because most of the, children were fathered by the slave masters, right? So they didn't want to, acknowledge that, right? That goes into like a whole nother conversation about white guilt, right? And, but not wanting to, have them inherit their names, inherit their, property, inherit their money that was made off the backs of, of us anyway. But also that way the father, even if he was not a slaveholder, could not claim rights to his children in case the slave master wanted to sell them off or do whatever they wanted, with his child. So yes, that law was put in place to protect their property.
And then when it came to the midwives, as you had mentioned, not being able to go to school, the ones that were taught to go to school, were able to afford to go to school rather, then had to wear uniforms. They had to, I forgot the name of the grand midwife they wrote a book about, but I remember her saying that they did not want them to use any of the medicine that they knew, and they had to carry around a book to log the events. And so what
I don't know if you're talking about Margaret Charles Smith. I'm not sure.
Yes, Margaret.
I just finished reading her book about a month ago.
Isn't it incredible? And how she was like, so all we did was carry around 2 books, because they would do checks on them to see if they had the book. So they would then have their book where they took their notes and had their herbs and talked about the healing, and then had the book that they had to show them, like, yes, we're keeping notes in your book too, in order to keep the heritage of the grand midwife alive.
And they had to have a bag to go and a bag to show. So a bag with all the proper things in it, but then the bag that they would really use with their herbal remedies and all of this that they had to hide, because this was deemed, witchcraft or, some voodoo stuff that doesn't work. And
And so what's amazing to me is that we have throughout history, and even in movies, right, we have this sense there were some things that followed but never were explained, right, in the sense of the grand, like when it came to birth. It was always in the movies, go boil water. Right? That was always, and no one understood that. And now bringing it back to, they didn't even know to wash their hands, but that is exactly what they were using
to
sterilize instruments, and also to cleanse themselves, like you had mentioned.
Yep.
And so now birth went into hospitals, and then they discovered this the hard way after many deaths. So as you mentioned, while you were in midwifery school, and learning how to navigate now, seeing these traumas and having some of your colleagues and classmates drop out because it was too traumatic, and you discovering, like, this is not going to break me. I'm not going to let this deter me from following this path, because I know how important it is. Can you speak to, once you graduated and you became a midwife, bringing that into practice with the work that you do, how was that received by the community? Because now we're going back. You have the education that, like, I forgot who, Shayla said on her episode, her grandmother used to say, steal the white man's education, right? So now you have that education, and you're using it, but then you also have your wisdom. How was that perceived by the community?
Right. I mean, I knew the whole time that I was in midwifery school that I wanted to go directly into home birth. I knew I did not want to work in any of these hospitals. I also knew that it wasn't like I was going to graduate one day and start a midwifery practice the next day. So I worked with many different home birth midwives who have been, working in this field, working in home birth for 10, 15, 20 years, because I wanted, that wisdom. That was what I did not get in school. We got a lot of the clinical, we got a lot of the didactic, but that passing on, that, oral tradition, that learning by, doing, honing those hand skills, I knew that was something that I had to kind of sit at the feet of these midwives, observe them in their elements. When they felt ready, saying, hey, why don't you, jump in and catch this one? We've got, how many babies, but, we trust you. The families trust you. So it was a natural progression for me, seeing different people's styles of how, you navigate the system, but still keep your traditions, in place. That was really important to me. So there were a few midwives that I had the honor of working with, and just soaking up, their knowledge, which really solidified, okay, yes, I definitely do not want to be in the hospital. And also just knowing that if you're experiencing a low risk, healthy pregnancy, you're actually safer at home than in the hospital. I want to amplify that information for people so that it becomes more of the norm, because that was the norm for us for many years.
Yeah. I think for me as a doula, when I speak with clients about midwifery and midwives and having choice, I always get for my first, I'll go into the hospital. Yeah. And my response is always, speak to a home birth midwife. Just have a conversation, because I believe that what they think a midwife comes to birth with, they have no clue that she is as educated and as skilled as an OB, but she does not do surgery. That's like the only thing that she doesn't do. And, you know, I have a girlfriend who says, and I love this saying, you don't go to the hardware store for oranges. Right?
Right.
And so, like you're mentioning, if you are, what are the parameters for being low risk in order to have a home birth?
So, I mean, generally you just have to be having a healthy pregnancy. There are three main things that can complicate a pregnancy and potentially make them high risk. So the main ones would be hypertension, high blood pressure that's unresolved, gestational diabetes that's not well managed, and anemia that is not resolved. However, those three things, in my practice, in my opinion, in my experience, can be corrected through diet and herbs if they're able to be caught early, or even better if you're able to work on them pre-conception. But I know that's not always the case. But especially with hypertension, trying to get to the root cause of what's triggering this hypertension. And for Black women, it's often stress. Yes. So that is one of the first things that I would ask. What are some of your stressors? There are techniques that can help to not only address the root cause of the stress, but also to, you know, stimulate the somatic nerve endings to release, you know, hormones that are going to calm and bring down your stress levels. There are herbs that will help with high blood pressure. You know, dandelion is excellent, you know, for high blood pressure. So there would be a certain, you know, lifestyle changes and then certain herbal recommendations to help regulate the blood pressure. So if we can get that, you know, regulated, then that's no longer a risk factor. For gestational diabetes, I really talk to people about, it's not just do you eat a lot of candy or sweets, it's what things turn to sugar in our bodies, right? So white rice, white bread. So I want them to tell me what their diet is typically like. You can have brown rice instead of white rice. You know, want to make sure that you're eating these things in moderation. You want to make sure that you're eating lots of dark green leafy veggies, that you're having carbs and healthy fats in, you know, the proper proportion. So we're able to correct those things as well. With anemia, I want to explain to them always why, if you are anemic going into giving birth, that can be dangerous because we know you're going to lose some blood, you know, in the process. If you were to lose a lot of blood and you're already going in with your hemoglobin and hematocrit levels very low, that could be dangerous. So we want those to come up. So I explain, you know, hemodilution, which means now you're pumping blood for two people. So you're going to see a natural decrease in that. So how do we bring it back up to the normal levels? Dark green leafy veggies, the liquid off of those greens that we're going to cook, nettles, yellow dock, alfalfa, blackstrap molasses, all of these things that we know. If you're going to take a liquid iron supplement, taking it with orange juice because that's going to increase absorption, avoiding dairy because that's going to deplete, you know, the storage. So you want to educate people, not just throw an iron pill at them because iron pills make people constipated. They're not going to take them. No. And if they don't understand the importance of getting their hemoglobin and hematocrit levels up, they're really not going to take them. So you want people to be an integral part of their own care. You want them to understand the implications behind what they do or don't do. Then people are more apt to, you know, be quote unquote compliant. I hate when they say, oh, a patient was non-compliant. I'm like, well, did you explain to them what they're complying to? Yeah, you know, how do you expect somebody to be compliant if you're just telling them, here's a script, take this. Well, what am I taking this for? It makes me constipated, so I'm not going to take it. But what happens if I don't? What happens if I don't correct this? So those are the three main things. And there's also a herbal protocol for preventing preeclampsia, which I think is something that Black women tend to deal with, you know, more than other groups of people. So these are things that early in pregnancy, I want to educate people about and make sure that their diets and their lifestyle is reflecting keeping the pregnancy as healthy as possible.
Okay, it's wonderful. And so I mentioned that's, you know, what are the barriers because they don't understand what a midwife brings.
Yeah.
The other one is, what do we do about the pain?
The pain?
If I want an epidural at home.
Okay. So we don't do epidurals at home. So that is one of the things that I explain to people all the time. No C-sections, no epidurals. However, when you are in your own environment, right? When you feel safe, when you feel comforted, that amazing hormone oxytocin is in full effect, right? Oxytocin is that hormone that's present when we make love, when we laugh, when we give birth, when we breastfeed our babies. And when that is on board, there are natural endorphins that are being sent out to your body that not only help your labor progress, but almost for some people give you a euphoric, feeling, right? Where they have a pleasurable birth experience, as opposed to one that's painful. And I think our bodies really follow our minds. So if we think, oh my God, this is going to be the most painful thing in the world, it's most likely going to be the most painful thing in the world because you've conditioned yourself to believe that. But if you know that, it cannot be stronger than you because this is power that's coming from you, right? Yes. And this is also pain with a purpose, right? It is bringing you closer to your baby. So it's what do you do during the contraction? What do you do during that wave? What do you do when it's beginning to start? You start breathing, right? What do you do when it gets to a climax? You ride that wave as opposed to fighting it. Because if you fight a wave, you're going to go under. If you tense up, you're going to make everything more painful. The progress is going to be, prolonged. So having a doula, of course, I tell people whether you're going to be at home, in a birth center, hospital, you want to have a doula. And people always ask, well, if I have a midwife, why would I? No, you want to have a doula and a midwife or a doula and an OB, whatever. But you want to have a doula on board because the doula, in my opinion, is connecting with that mother, right? She's supporting that mom emotionally, physically, spiritually. That is what you need to kind of get through. And I also explain to people that it's not continuous pain, right? Yes. It's with the contraction. So that is really important for people to have an understanding of that it's not going to be this one long continuous, painful event. But it's how you get into a rhythm with your own body and what can you do at the height of labor. Maybe your contraction is lasting a minute and a half. So what can you do for a minute and a half to keep your body nice and calm? You can sing, you can breathe, you can hum, you can dance, you can use counter pressure. There's so many things that you can do. And when you're in an environment where adrenaline is not on board, right? Because adrenaline and oxytocin cannot coexist. So if you're in an environment where you don't feel safe, machines are beeping, bright lights are overhead, people are coming in and out, people are examining you without asking, right? That is going to get adrenaline on board where that fight or flight reflex comes in. And yes, things are going to be very painful because your body is sending off alarm bells. Get me out of here, get this baby out of me, as opposed to let me get into my body. So I think for the pain, that is something that when you talk to somebody about what to expect and how the environment is really going to either increase that intensity or bring it down, that people have a better understanding of figuring out how they can deal with, the pain or the power, like I like to call it. And then also, knowing that if you're going to be at home or even any setting, you want to use all 5 of your senses. What do I want the room to smell like? What do I want it to sound like? What do I want to be looking at? Do I want to have, a picture that's inspiring to me? Do I want to have some aromatherapy oils going? Do I want to have music playing, ocean sounds, drumming, silence? Really start making it your own. That helps. In midwifery, I feel like the same way for doula work, the mother is choosing the doula. That baby chooses the midwife, right? So that baby communicates to the mother, look, this is who I need to catch me, right? Yeah. So it's more of a connection with the baby, but a good midwife is understanding that it's mother baby, right? You're still caring for the mother, but it's really tuning in and communing with that baby. What is that baby communicating? Because there are 4 things that we're looking at, right? There are 4 P's that they call it of labor. So there is the passenger, which is the baby, right? There's the pelvis, which is the mom's, actual body and how the baby kind of navigates through that. There is the power, the contractions and how strong they are and, how effective they are. And then there's the psyche of the mother. So if you're thinking of all 4 of those things, you have to understand the connection between mother, baby, and also the extended family. What are they putting in mom's psyche? Are they on board? Do they feel comfortable with the process? So you have to incorporate the entire family or her entire support system if you want to have, that experience where she can have a euphoric birth.
Mm-hmm. That's amazing. I never heard of the 4 Ps before. That really puts a lot in perspective. And I just love the way you described how the whole process works, in the sense of like, yes, you choose your doula, but your baby is choosing your midwife, right? And paying attention, or your provider, right? Because if there's a breech that can't be delivered vaginally, then that is also an issue. And then there's something going on in that respect as well. And we have to listen to baby in that respect, even when we try versions and they don't work.
Sometimes there's a reason.
Yes, exactly. Our little midwife assistant. Hi.
Yes.
What do you love the most about being a midwife?
Oh, it's such a multifaceted thing. I love the activism part of it. I really do, because I think that's really important. I tell anybody, if you're going to get into this work, know that there's politics behind it. There's, activism, advocacy work, but I love the activism. I love the idea of being able to take power into your own hands, in a sense, in terms of then going on to empower families with knowledge, arming them with factual information so that they can make the best decision for them. And, taking the ego out of it. It's not my baby. It's not my birth. It's not my body, but I'm simply listening to this family and gauging what their needs are, and then supporting them in that. I think that is very freeing when you realize that, what might be best for me might not be best for this, next person coming along. Respecting that and having no ego in that, where now you're offended that maybe they've interviewed with you, but decided they want to birth in a birthing center instead of with you at home, or they want the hospital is best for them. That's what autonomy is. That is where you want to give somebody as much information as possible so they can come to the best decision for them. So that is really freeing for me. I love that aspect of it, watching somebody come into their own awareness and then make an informed decision.
Speaking of activism, this is a great way to segue. I just love how you just segued into everything that we need to talk about, just flowed. You are also helping to spearhead a birthing center. The birthing place. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yes. So, one second. Okay, 1 second, lady. Okay. So, Myla Flores and I have been, friends, birth worker companions for many years. And we've always been kind of talking about this idea. And a little over a year ago, we were at a birth together. It was an amazing home birth. And on the way home, we're both riding this oxytocin wave on the one train, riding uptown. And we were just like, we got to bring this birth center, to fruition. So the idea is to have a birthing center, midwifery led, in the Riverdale section of the Bronx. But in addition, having other extension centers in other areas that are, quote unquote, underserved. So Yonkers, Mount Vernon, South Bronx. And in the interim of getting this center, that is not only going to be a birthing center, but a healing center as well. So we will have, all types of holistic practitioners there in one space so that people don't have to get their care piecemeal. But we also plan on having mobile units that until the, place is complete and up to code, because there are a lot of, hoops to jump through to get a midwifery-led birth center in place. That we will have mobile units that will be able to go to these communities in the interim to make sure that they're still getting information about the birth center, information about home birth and the hospitals in their area, but then also getting that care in the meantime as well. That's a project that we've been working on along with Bruce McIntyre, who I'm not sure if you're aware, but he was Amber Rose Isaac's partner. Yes. Amber passed away in April. So we've collaborated on a few things. Birds from the Earth already had a access to home birth scholarship in place, but we renamed that in Amber's honor to be able to offset the cost for hiring home birth midwives, because the cost is often a barrier. It's not covered the same way that a hospital birth is covered by insurance. So when somebody is a great candidate for home birth, really desires to birth their baby at home, has found qualified midwives to do so, but now the insurance is an issue, they can apply for a scholarship and we can offset the cost so that they can still birth at home. And so far we've helped 11 families and can
that's wonderful.
And to continue to help more. So so it's just about bringing more resources, because we know that everybody is not going to want to birth at home, but many people do not want to birth in a hospital. And my catchphrase is that the same way there's a liquor store in every other corner in the hood, that's how we should have access to birth centers and, clinics and, quality care. That is truly essential. And if there's one thing that the pandemic has had us debating, what is essential and what's not, I would say that birth centers and, quality care is essential.
That is wonderful. I want to be mindful of your time because I know you have another appointment.
I do have somebody coming up.
So I am going to have you back. That's just, I'm definitely going to have you back. I'm just looking at the time and I'm like, I think this would be a good place for us to stop because I want to be mindful of, I could go on. I've really enjoyed talking to you. I love these conversations. I can't wait to meet you in person. And then, because I definitely want to hear about, I'll have to have a different segment where you can talk about your birth stories, because I usually like to end the segment with that, and I'd love to hear about them. I love birth stories about a doula,
Well, I'll just say briefly that my 2 hospital births are definitely what lent me into then having 3 amazing home births. And as much as I say if I had known better, I probably would have had all 5 of them at home. I don't regret those experiences because it definitely shaped the birth worker that I am today. Definitely. So everything happens for a reason. For sure.
Definitely. That is so true. And thank you so much for being on. Thank you for being open and candid. I really love that. I'm going to include in our show notes where people can find information on how they can support your organization as well as the birthing center to get the word out, because I like you believe that women need to have choice on where they give birth, and that's where it starts. So I truly appreciate you. Thank you. I can't wait.
Thank you. I appreciate you too. Have a beautiful rest of the day.
Thank you. You too. You too.
Okay.
All right. Bye. Hola. Hello, everyone. I like to include birth stories at the end of each podcast. Today, we will be hearing from Rini, a mom of 2. Each of her birth experiences were vastly different. She explains her vaginal birth with her son and then her C-section with her daughter. I think it's important to hear Rini's perspective on having a vaginal birth and C-section, which she handled with grace. Rini, good morning. Would you tell us about your birth story?
Sure. Annette, it's great to have the chance to talk with you and share my birth stories. So my son James was born in 2015. I was in my early to mid 30s, and I knew that I wanted to have a natural birth, or that was my goal. And my mom had 4 children, and all of us, she had, natural unmedicated vaginal births. And I just, really felt that was something I hoped to do if it was possible. I wanted to have a midwife. I wanted to have, give birth in a birthing center if possible. And I think a lot of my mother's experience had informed, my goals and the way I thought about birth. And, just to share a little bit about her, she was, she is an immigrant. She's from Guyana, and came over in the 70s. And then, when she had my older brother, in the early 80s, didn't have real access to good care and, was treated really badly at, free health clinics, was a low income woman, and was still able to have a natural birth, but really, it was a challenging experience. And then as she, gained experience and was able to make her own choices, was able to, give birth for me and my younger brothers with midwives and with a more supportive environment. And she always talked about, when she was pregnant with my older brother, how she was humiliated and told she was gaining too much weight and really, treated in a really terrible way, and how with us, the younger ones, she was able to really be empowered and have a midwife who was supportive and who helped her have the experience she wanted to have. So that is kind of what informed me coming into, being pregnant and getting ready to give birth. I was also aware of the really terrible racial inequities in maternal mortality. And as a Black woman, I knew it was even more important for me to be informed and for me to take charge of my experience to make sure that I would be able to have the kind of birth experience that I wanted and be healthy, and for me and my child to come out on the other side healthy and whole. So, I got pregnant and we were living in New York City, and I had thought about where I wanted to give birth, and I learned about the birthing center. Again, that was kind of informed by my mom because she'd given birth to my youngest brother in a birthing center. And that was cool. Like, we had gotten to go there as the older kids and see the experience. And so I said, I want to try a birthing center. And so at that time, there was one at St. Luke's Roosevelt. And so I kind of looked for midwives who delivered there. And that was very near my apartment. So it kind of all came together really nicely. And I connected with a midwifery practice that delivered and that used the birthing center. I went to all of the classes to use the birthing center. I was having a healthy pregnancy. And the more I thought about it, the more I thought, to really have the kind of experience I want to have, it's important for me to have a doula, to have someone who can lead me through the process, who can kind of be my partner along. And I do have a husband and a partner. And I think the reason that having a doula was very important to me, in addition to having my husband there, was because he doesn't know what he's doing. He doesn't know anything about childbirth, and he's very squeamish. So he made it clear from the beginning that it was important to him to be kind of supporting me through being with me and talking with me and holding my hand, but that he would not be catching the baby or cutting the cord. He was concerned that if he cut the cord or caught the baby, he might pass out and require his own care. So he said, let's make sure, that he's okay and that I'm okay. And that I want someone who can really support me through the process and who knows what they're doing. I mean, I think I had been exposed to doulas because a friend of mine was a postpartum doula. And I learned about that first. And then I said, well, what about the birth? And she explained about a birth doula. And, I really think that in modern culture, we don't always have the elders or the folks who can support you and teach you. And I really wanted someone who could do that. And my mom offered to be my doula. She said, you don't need a doula, I can do it. And what I will say is that with our mothers and people we're very close to, often there's a lot of there are some issues that can come up. And so I thought, let me have someone who I can, explain what I want and do it on my terms. And so I started, reaching out to people. And I think with my first pregnancy, I reached out around 20 weeks or right before 20 weeks. And I think that was a little late because I reached out to a lot of people and they were already kind of like booked up. And I was like, where do I start to find a doula? And I started because my midwifery practice had a list of people. And so I just started calling around. And the other thing I would say is most practices these days have multiple providers, and you meet with, all the different providers throughout the, whether it's an OB practice or a midwifery practice, you meet with different providers and you get whoever's on call. And certainly I understand why that makes sense. But I wanted someone who I knew was going to be there, who was going to be there throughout my pregnancy and who was going to be there at my delivery. So I, it kind of met with a number of doulas. I think I probably met with around 5 of them. And, I really followed my gut and I really connected with Sasha, and, felt like she kind of had the combination of compassion, practical support, and just kind of we clicked. And so we agreed to work together, and it was great. I think from the beginning to have someone that I could trust and go to and ask questions, and really that I could be totally open with and not have, any really have an open relationship. As I prepared for my birth, I was a healthy woman. I was having, didn't really have any issues. I started to have some higher blood pressure readings in my visits to the midwives, and they would always kind of have me take a few deep breaths, and then the blood pressure readings would go down. So, things were going really well. I was aware that I had been born 3 weeks early myself, and my brother had also, so that my mom, and, I'm kind of similar to my mom in my build and so my body is similar to her. So I thought, okay, she had, her children 3 weeks early. Maybe I might do that too. So I was kind of thought this might happen. And then, it was the weekend before Labor Day, or Labor Day weekend. And, I really started cleaning up and getting ready. And I said, well, I wonder if this is nesting, but I would get up early in the morning and just get all the baby clothes ready and get the stroller ready and everything. And I did normal stuff that weekend. I went out to dinner in Brooklyn. I came back to Manhattan, I was very pregnant, but I was kind of comfortable. It was extremely hot. It was probably 100 degrees the day before, or on Labor Day. And I went to Central Park with my husband, and I remember I wasn't feeling great. I felt I didn't have an appetite, and which was unusual for me. And I didn't feel good. But I thought, well, maybe it's just because it's really hot. The morning after the Tuesday after Labor Day, I woke up and something was weird. I kind of didn't feel right. I felt kind of weird. And then I noticed, I feel weird every 10 minutes or so. And I said, this is contractions and very early labor. And, I started noticing the pattern, and it wasn't painful. And it was nice to be able to connect with Sasha, let her know what was going on. She said, just hang out at home. I lived at that point just a block away from the hospital. And so my plan was to, stay at home as long as possible. And because of my proximity to the hospital, I was able to do that. And that day, was pretty much a normal day. I just was able to be on my birth ball and, walk around the apartment. As the contractions got a little closer, my husband came home from work so that he could be there, but he kept working at home, and, it was just kind of happening, but fine. And then as the day wore on, the contractions got a little closer together and a little closer together. And then, Sasha, my doula, was in Brooklyn, and I think it was almost 2 hours away to get there. So we kind of were trying to think of okay, when should she come? And probably in the early evening, the contractions got more intense and closer together. And so I was kind of taking a bath and taking a shower and just trying different ways to feel comfortable. I reached out to the midwives as well, and also to Sasha. And she said, keep me posted. Most of the time, labor takes long. So just, you're going to be okay. And then I think probably around 6 p.m., it got more intense. And this was one of the moments where I'm really grateful for my, Sasha was kind of advising me, because the midwives, actually it must have been earlier because it was when the office was open. Maybe it was 3 o'clock in the afternoon. And the midwife on call said, well, why don't you come in so I can see how dilated you are? And that, and then we can kind of go from there. And I was also very close to the midwife practice, and I, could have walked there. And I called Sasha and I said, the midwife said I can come in. And she said, I really don't recommend you go in unless they say you have to, which they haven't, and they really couldn't, require you to. She said, knowing how much you're dilated really doesn't give any information. You could get from, you could dilate very quickly, later stages of labor. So what's the point of going in? You're going to be walking outside. It's 100 degrees. You're going to it will be stressful for you, stressful on your body to do that. Just stay home where you're comfortable. And that was, I think, really great advice. And that's one of the many times I think if I hadn't had a doula, I would have just said, oh, great, let me go in. And the midwives, the midwife wanted to know how she wanted to be able to make her own decisions.
Yeah.
And whether she should go back to, I think she lived in Brooklyn too, whether she should go home and, put her kids to bed. And I understand that, but it was really important for me to have an ally and an advocate who only had my interests in mind and who could tell me, hey, this doesn't really make sense for you. So I did not go into the office. I'm really grateful, and I'll come back to that later. I just stayed home, and I was with my husband and trying to get comfortable. And then the labor pains got more intense. They got closer together. And I think around 6 o'clock, I said, I told my husband, call Sasha and tell her I think she should come. And, at that point, I'd been in labor less than 12 hours. I think I woke up that day around 9 a.m. I woke up late. And so I'd probably been in labor 9 hours. And so it wasn't really like I had been in labor a long time. But I just felt it was getting intense and I wanted support. So we said, Sasha, it would be great if you could come. So she came and, it took a while. So we needed to have some lead time. So she came and kind of supported me. I was in a lot of pain. She did some different positions. And I threw up, which I know can happen, but was still surprising. And she helped me clean it up. So she, was just kind of there. And then I was taking a bath. Zach, my husband, was with me, and Sasha was doing the dishes. So she also said, she said, you don't want to come home to an apartment full of dirty dishes when you have your new baby. So like she was helping us just get ready. And I think that's another great thing about doulas is they do whatever you need. And that was a great thing to just be like, let's get this apartment ready to bring home a baby, because I was still 3 weeks before my due date. So I wasn't really, we weren't 1,000% ready. So, when I was in the bath, it got really intense, and it was probably about 8 or 9 p.m. at that point. And I was just like, this is so painful. I can't do this anymore, is how I felt. And Sasha said, okay, we can let's go to the hospital. And at that point, I really felt like I wanted like an epidural or like pain medication, because it was just too much. It was overwhelming. And we needed to get to the hospital, and it was a block away, which is short, but being in labor and traveling and moving is not easy at that point when I was dealing with such intense contractions. So Sasha helped us. She taught my husband how to support me during contraction. So we would walk like 10 feet and then stop for a contraction and then walk a few more feet. So even that, without her, we wouldn't have been able to really get where we were going. So she helped us. We figured out, we got there, and we got to the labor and delivery triage, and they kind of said, oh, you're fine. And even in the triage room, I was doing cat-cow yoga poses, just trying to keep my body moving to be comfortable, just while I was waiting to be admitted to the, to labor and delivery, or where they take your statistics or whatever in that first area. And so I got in there, and they took my blood pressure, and it was off the charts. It was very high, and they were very concerned. But they said, well, maybe it's just that you're in labor. And then they checked me, and I was 10 centimeters. So I was basically ready to have the baby at that moment. And so, and at that point, they couldn't even give me an epidural. It was too late. And Sasha said, well, that's the reason you need it. You were in so much pain. You were in transition. You were basically, that was the worst part. And now you can just like have this baby. So the midwife got there. I couldn't even pee. They were like, we need a urine sample. I couldn't do it. Everything was just like happening so quickly. So I think we got to the hospital, around maybe 10:30 p.m. And my son was born less than an hour later. Wow. So it really happened very quickly at that point. And and I couldn't use the birthing center because my blood pressure was so high. So I ended up, just using the regular labor and delivery. And I'll say that it was still a really, I was glad I was at a hospital that had a birthing center, because the nurse I had was a nurse who was used to natural labor. She was used to what I was, going through, the noises I was making, and she wasn't surprised, and she was really supportive. So even though I wasn't able to use the birthing center, I think it was still a very positive labor and delivery experience there, because their staff was used to the birthing center approach. The baby came pretty quick, after all of that. And, the pushing, it was all challenging, but by then I was just happy that it was like going to be over soon. And he came out, and he was healthy and strong. And then, a few minutes after he was born, they came back with my my results from my all the blood work that they had taken because my blood pressure had been high, and it turned out I was having like preeclampsia, really severe preeclampsia, which is a dangerous condition for pregnant and postpartum moms. And so at that point, they said, this is really, a problem, and we need to make sure, that we're going to have to monitor you closely. You have to go to what's called the recovery room. And so it was great to have Sasha there throughout all of this, just to be kind of a support and a help. And she actually was the one, when I was delivering, who suggested the position that allowed me to deliver James. Like the nurse was like, "Oh, go on your side," or, everybody was saying try all these different things. And she said, "Why don't you try on your back?" Which isn't always what works, but for me, that's what worked. I was on my back, and that's what helped the baby come out. So, I think just having someone there who's been there, who knows how to try different things, who says like, who can just kind of advocate for you was huge. You can hear Aubrey in the background, so we'll get to her in a few minutes. So afterwards I had to go to the recovery room, and that is another place where having an advocate made a big difference, because they were telling me that I couldn't keep my baby with me. And I really wanted to keep my baby. That was very important to me. I wanted to breastfeed. And I said, I really want the baby. And Sasha was just kind of like, keep saying it, keep telling them. And, and it's interesting because I think in a medical setting, people just tell you what they think is a rule when it's just what they're used to doing. Exactly. And so everybody kept saying, oh, you can't have the baby because, if there's not enough room, and you can't have your partner with you. And I was just like, I want my baby with me. I want my partner with me. And, and then that's what happened. I got, James was able to be there, and Zach. But I think they're just used to how things work. And so I think really having someone who say, no, you can keep pushing, you can keep advocating for yourself, made a big difference. So that night, Sasha went back to our apartment and rested. My husband stayed with me. And then in the morning or at some point they switched, so he could go rest and she could stay with me. So I think that was a big difference too. Knowing that we were going to be in the hospital for a few days, it was important for us to make sure my husband could get at least a little bit of rest. The recovery room is really challenging. It's people who have had C-sections or who need to be monitored. And there were like 4 or 6, there were a lot of women in there and the babies and partners. And it was just like a really chaotic space. I wasn't really able to rest there. So, the remainder of my hospital experience was pretty challenging, because there was all the constant monitoring for the preeclampsia. They wouldn't let me eat at all, which was terrible because I was really hungry. The midwives, I think, really weren't able to follow my case at that point because it was kind of a more severe situation. So it was the OBs on call that were monitoring me, and I didn't have a relationship with them. So that was also very challenging. So I think for me, like my labor and delivery was really positive in what I wanted. And then my post delivery, the very early postpartum experience was really challenging. And throughout that time, it was great to be able to have Sasha as a resource. She actually, I think the next day had to go to a different birth. I think she might have gone right from our birth to another birth, which is crazy.
The life of a doula.
Yeah, it was just like wild. And, but she was still, available. She got me started on breastfeeding. And then like the few weeks following the delivery were really challenging for me. And she just remained a support and remained a person I could just kind of say like, hey, what's going on? How do we approach this? Like just kind of somebody who's been through it. Yeah. So I think we just had a fantastic experience with having a doula. And it was so funny because when we got pregnant the second time, some people said, well, this is your second time. Like, you don't need a doula. And we said, well, of course we need a doula. Like, now we know how important it is to have a doula. Like, we're not going to then go back to not having one. Like, we definitely know we need one. So when I got pregnant with Aubrey, we said, we definitely need a doula. And our first thought was to have Sasha because we'd worked with her before. But she was no longer working as a doula. And as you know, it's a very demanding job. Yeah. So she said she had moved on from that. And so she gave me some names, and she gave me your name, Annette. And it was great to meet you, and we clicked. And, you were in the neighborhood, which at that point, because things had moved so quickly last time, we felt like, well, things might move really quickly this time. Yeah. And so we were really happy to meet you and happy to know that you were nearby and kind of share our plans. I had decided to use an OB because I was concerned if I had preeclampsia again, I wanted someone who could support me, through that experience as well. And the midwives really weren't allowed to kind of be my care provider because of the complications. So I decided I wanted an OB. I found an OB that was very supportive and understood that I wanted a natural birth. And then at my 36-week ultrasound, Aubrey was breech. And, I shared that with you, and we brainstormed about it, talked about things we could do. And I tried a bunch of remedies or a bunch of, ways to help turn her, and positions and, drinks and whatever. And I did a version, which was a pretty intense experience. Mm-hmm. And it didn't work. She didn't turn, and so she stayed breech. And so I needed to have a C-section in New York City. I don't believe any hospital will deliver a breech baby vaginally, though I understand it's possible in other parts of the country, but not in New York.
There's one hospital in Queens and one doctor, but it's like the stars and the moon have to lie. Everything has to be perfect, and it's a city hospital. So. Oh wow,
yeah. And I just felt at that point like I was also nervous myself, and so I said like, we tried the version. The one thing I would say about the version, the experience of having that, is that the doctor, like, they weren't able to schedule it quickly. So it was on, when I learned she was breech, it was at my 36-week ultrasound, and I called right away to try to schedule the version, and I couldn't schedule it for a week. And then when I got there and the doctor tried, it didn't work. He said, "Oh, I wish you would come in earlier." And I said, like, I've been trying to come in for a week. So I really hope that, I said, like, you guys really need to work on this, because I tried to get in here right away because the baby is just growing at that point. And, I think the baby was just too big to turn and was kind of lodged where she was in my body at that point. So, some people said, well, you had a C-section, you didn't need a doula. And actually, as you know, Annette, it was great to have a doula for a C-section as well, just to kind of walk us through the experience and to have, you just need more than one person supporting you and somebody who's been through it. And I think, as we approached the C-section, you had great advice and help. And having a second child is a different experience as well, because you have to figure out how to support your first child, who is also going through a really, significant life change. And so, like, that morning for my C-section, you went with me to the hospital, and my husband stayed and got my son ready for school. And that was important, to have someone who could support our son and let him have some semblance of his normal routine while you help get me ready for a really, big day for our family as well. And then at the hospital, I think having your advice and kind of your support and knowing what to do was really helpful. And then after the baby is born, like, the baby needs someone to support them and the mom needs someone. So I think having a doula to support me was so important, along with, that my husband could really be with the baby. And one just small example was, Aubrey was born. She was very big. She was 9 pounds, which, isn't that big, but compared to my son had been 6.5 pounds. Exactly. And I think that might have been why she wouldn't move. She was kind of like, she was big, and I'm petite. I'm only 5'3", and my husband is 6'5". So we are very different sizes. So I say, like, Aubrey was his baby. She was like basically a Zach sized baby in my body. So she was kind of like, stuck in there. So after she was born, you helped us get started with breastfeeding, all of that. That was great. But the room we were in after the C-section is very cold. It's freezing. And, then she got cold, and they were very concerned, why is she so cold? And I was like, well, maybe you shouldn't make this room so cold. But by the time they noted that she was cold and she wasn't warming up, they had to take her to the it wasn't the neonatal ICU, but it was the step down from that. Yes. So the PICU, yeah. So they had to take Aubrey, And for me, it was really important that my husband stayed with her the whole time. And, that there was someone, an advocate for her, and I just, I think that, nurses and doctors and health workers are doing their best, but I really wanted someone who could be there with the baby to make sure she was advocated for and that she was getting the care we wanted her to have, and that she was brought back right away because I wanted to be with her. So at that point, my husband went with her and you stayed with me. And that was, again, very important to have you there. And I remember when they moved me from the recovery room to the room that I was going to be in, the postpartum room. And I was still recovering from the C-section. And I, really couldn't tell up from down. And I remember, I don't know if you remember this, Annette, but we got to my room and I threw up right away.
Yes.
Like I was just like so nauseous, and you caught my throw up. So that was one of the many really helpful things. But it was just like there's so much going on and you don't even know up from down. You've just been through this major surgery. And so I think, having you there with me was so helpful throughout that day. And, even just, again, talking to the nurses and the doctors and saying, well, when can we get the baby back? When can we, really start breastfeeding again? When can I eat so that I can start feeling better? All of those things. It was really critical to have you. And I think you stayed a very long time that day, and it was really, really helpful throughout the day to have you there. So, I think when I look at these two extremely different birth experiences, one at 37 weeks by, unmedicated vaginal birth, and one at 40 weeks with a C-section. And in both experiences, I think having a doula was just critical to having the kind of experience that I want to have. And no birth is going to be the same as another one. They're all so different, just like every child is different, every baby is different. But I think what I learned after my first one and with the second one was that, having a doula is really something that can help you have the most positive experience that you can. And so thank you for helping us and for supporting me through that.
Oh, you're welcome. You're welcome. It was my pleasure. It really was. Oh, that's so great.
Yeah. So I don't know, is there anything else that would be helpful for me to talk about? I've kind of talked at length about it.
Yes, no, that was great. You covered everything. And most importantly, like the entire reason why, for the first time, most people think having a doula is necessary. And then the second time thinking, yes, no, of course, the second time is just as necessary. And yes, even in a C-section, it's necessary to have your doula. I think is it's important for people to hear and understand that, yeah, you could be supported in both ways and they're both valid. And, I think a lot of times most people just go into thinking, oh, if I had a vaginal birth for my first, then my second will most definitely be a vaginal birth, and not really think about the C-section. A lot of people go into, that's not going to happen to me. So to hear your experience from that perspective is also, I think, eye-opening for people to really get an understanding of, if that were to happen, I could still be supported through the process. So yeah, I appreciate you covered everything. Thank you so much for sharing your story. That was great.
Sure. Happy to do it. And absolutely, I think, from an unmedicated vaginal birth to a C-section, different size babies, different hospitals, a doula is a critical support person, no matter where or how you're having your baby. So I'm really happy that I had that support. I'm grateful for it. I think it should be available to everyone. And you see studies show that it really does make a difference. So
Definitely.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Thanks for having me.
No, thank you so much. And I'll definitely let you know when we're going to release this episode. Right now, episode 1 is up on Spot. I'll send you the link on Spotify and Apple Music, Apple Podcast. So they're up. But I really appreciate this. Thank you so much for your time.
Sure.
A great honor to hear your story again.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you too.
Yep. Kiss the little ones for me, and hopefully when this is all done, I'll see you in the neighborhood.
Yes, exactly. Alrighty, Annette, take care.
You too. Thank you so much. Gracias. Thanks for listening to the Clearbirth Podcast. Please don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe. You can find me on Instagram at the Clearbirth Podcast. If you want to send me an email, you can reach me at theclearbirthpodcast@gmail.com. Adios, hasta luego, goodbye, until next time.